My whole family always saw my son as perfect, a brilliant CEO who could do no wrong. At my grandson's 8th birthday party, I was about to raise my champagne glass during the family toast when my wife, a doctor, suddenly grabbed my hand. "Don't touch that glass." I froze. The smile on her face disappeared, and for the first time in my life, I realized something was terribly wrong inside the family I trusted most. "Thank you for being here. It means everything. Now I have a question for you. What country or city are you watching from right now? Leave it in the comments below. You're part of this community on Revenge Dad, and I want to hear from you. A reminder, this story includes fictional elements added for educational purposes. Names and settings are coincidental, but the message, that one, is all yours. The night my grandson turned 8 years old was supposed to be the happiest night of the year. My wife Margaret had spent 3 weeks planning every detail of Ethan's birthday party. The string lights wrapped around the oak trees in our backyard, the custom cake shaped like a baseball diamond. Because Ethan had decided that summer he was going to be the next Derek Jeter, and the long dinner table set with white linen and candles that caught the warm California breeze just right. Our home in Beverly Hills had seen a lot of evenings like this over the years. Milestone birthdays, holiday gatherings, the kind of nights that photograph well and feel even better in person. But something about watching my grandson run barefoot across the grass that evening, arms stretched wide, laughing at nothing, in particular made my chest feel full in a way I hadn't expected. 62 years old and a laughing 8-year-old could still do that to me. I had built Walker Medical Solutions from a cramped workshop in East Los Angeles more than 30 years ago. I had signed contracts that made my hands tremble, navigated recessions that nearly broke us, and worked through holidays and anniversaries and school plays I missed because there was always one more problem to solve. But standing on that patio in the soft evening light, watching Ethan chase the family dog around the garden while Daniel called after him to slow down, I thought this is what it was all for. Moments exactly like this one. My daughter Olivia was standing near the drink station laughing at something one of the guests had said. She looked effortless the way she always did, composed sharp, the kind of woman who walked into a room and immediately owned it. She had her mother's cheekbones and my stubbornness, and I had always thought she got the better end of that deal. Beside her, Daniel was loosening his tie, his face flushed from the warm evening and whatever conversation he had been pulled into. My son, my CEO, 38 years old, and still making the same face he made at 12 when something amused him. But he was trying to look serious. I thought for the 100th time that evening that I was a lucky man. When the MC, a family friend Margaret had hired to keep the evening moving, tapped the microphone and asked everyone to gather for the birthday toast. The backyard shifted into gentle motion. Guests collected their glasses, moving toward the long table, with that particular ease that comes after good food and good wine. Margaret appeared at my elbow, elegant in the deep blue dress she had bought for the occasion, and pressed a champagne flute into my hand. "He's going to be so embarrassed when we sing," she murmured, the corner of her mouth lifting. "He loves it," I said. "He's just going to pretend he doesn't." Ethan was already at the center of the gathering, standing beside his birthday cake, with 8 candles waiting to be lit. His dark eyes were scanning the crowd with that particular mix of excitement and self-consciousness that only children can pull off. When he found me in the crowd, he grinned wide and unguarded, and I raised my glass slightly in his direction. The MC invited the family to come forward. Daniel moved to Ethan's left, dropping a hand onto his son's shoulder. Olivia stepped into position on the right. Her champagne flute raised her smile, warm and unhesitating. I moved to stand beside Margaret, lifting my glass as the first candle flame caught the breeze and steadied. "To Ethan!" The MC began his voice, carrying easily across the backyard. 8 years old and already... Margaret's hand closed around my wrist so fast I nearly dropped the glass. Not a gentle touch, not a nudge. Her fingers locked around my wrist like a clamp, with a strength that made the bones in my hand compress, and she pulled my arm downward with quiet, deliberate force. The champagne flute tipped gold liquid catching the candlelight as the glass swung away from my lips. "Richard," her voice was barely above a breath, pressed close to my ear. "Don't touch that glass." I turned to look at her. The warmth that had been in her face 10 seconds ago was completely gone. In its place was something I had learned to recognize over 35 years of marriage. Not fear, not worry, but the focused, unblinking stillness of a physician who has just seen something that does not belong. Margaret had been a doctor for 30 years. I had seen that expression in her before, in hospital corridors and late-night phone calls from colleagues. It was the expression of someone whose mind had already shifted into a different gear entirely. My heart slammed against my ribs. "Margaret," I said, keeping my voice low, "what are you not here?" She took the flute from my hand, her movement smooth enough that no one nearby seemed to notice. She set it on the table behind us with the careful precision of someone handling something that required care. "Smile. Keep smiling, Richard. Don't look at the glass." I smiled. God help me. I smiled because 35 years with this woman had taught me that when Margaret used that tone, you did not ask questions. You listened first and understood later. Ethan blew out his candles. The backyard erupted in applause and the kind of cheerful chaos that only a room full of people who genuinely like each other can produce. I clapped with everyone else. I watched Daniel lift Ethan off the ground in a bear hug that made the boy squeal with delight. I watched Olivia laugh, her head thrown back, champagne flute still raised. And underneath all of it, my pulse was hammering so hard I could feel it in my back teeth. When Margaret pulled me gently toward the side of the patio, away from the noise, away from the candles and the laughter, I followed without a word. The garden was darker here, the string lights a soft blur through the trees, and the sounds of the party felt suddenly very far away. I looked at my wife. Her jaw was set. Her hands were clasped together in front of her, and I could see the tension in her knuckles, the particular tightness that meant she was working to keep herself steady. "Talk to me," I said. My voice came out rougher than I intended. "Right now, what did you see?" Margaret lifted her eyes to mine, and what I saw there made the warmth drain out of the evening entirely. "I need to make a phone call," she said. "There's something wrong with your drink, Richard, and I need to find out what it is before we do anything else." I looked back toward the party. 60 people, candlelight, the smell of birthday cake and cut grass. Ethan was already tearing into a gift tissue paper. Flying Daniel crouched beside him, with a grin splitting his face wide open. Olivia was watching the two of them. And even from across the yard, even in the warm, forgiving light of a summer evening, I could see that her smile had changed. I just did not yet know what that meant. The side garden was darker than I expected. Someone had strung lights along the back fence, but out here, tucked behind the row of mature olive trees Margaret had insisted on planting. When we first bought this house, the party felt like it belonged to a different world entirely. I could still hear it, the laughter, the clinking of glasses, the MC's voice carrying over the crowd as he transitioned the evening toward dessert. But the sounds were muffled now, softened by distance and leaves, and standing here with my wife, in the half-dark, I felt the cold reach of something I could not yet name spreading through my chest. Margaret had not let go of my arm. "Tell me," I said. My voice was steady. My hands were not. "Right now, Margaret, what did you see?" She turned to face me, and in the dim light filtering through the olive branches, I could see that her jaw was working the way it did when she was organizing her thoughts into something precise enough to say out loud. Margaret had always been like that. 30 years as an internist had trained her to speak carefully, to choose words the way a surgeon chooses instruments. She did not speculate. She did not alarm unnecessarily, which was exactly why the expression on her face was making my stomach drop straight through the ground. "The viscosity was wrong," she said. "The viscosity of the liquid in your glass, Richard." She pressed her fingers against her temple, working through it. "Champagne is thin. It moves a certain way, and the light catches a certain way when you tilt the glass. What I saw in your flute was heavier. There was a slight cloudiness near the bottom, not condensation, not a flaw in the crystal. Something had been added to it, something that had not fully dissolved." I stared at her. My throat had gone completely dry. "Margaret," I said carefully, "we're at our grandson's birthday party, in our own backyard. You're telling me—" "I'm telling you that I've been a physician for 30 years. Her voice did not waver, but her hands came up and gripped both of my forearms, her fingers pressing hard enough that I could feel each one individually. "I know what a clean glass looks like, Richard. I know what champagne looks like. And I know what it looks like when something has been introduced to a liquid that was not supposed to be there." The word "introduced" landed between us like something physical. I took a step back. My heel caught the edge of a flagstone, and I reached out automatically, steadying myself against the trunk of the nearest olive tree bark, rough and solid under my palm. The laughter from the party drifted over the fence, and I had the sudden disorienting sensation of standing in two places at once in the warm, ordinary world of Ethan's birthday. and in something else, entirely, something that had no warmth in it at all. "You kept the glass," I said. "I kept the glass." Margaret reached into the small clutch she'd been carrying all evening and held up a folded cocktail napkin. She had wrapped the base of the flute in it before setting it on the table I had not even noticed. "I'm going to call David Reeves. He runs the toxicology lab at Cedars. We trained together. He owes me more than one favor." Dr. David Reeves, I knew the name. Margaret had mentioned him over the years, a quiet, meticulous man who had built one of the most respected private toxicology programs in Los Angeles. "At this hour?" I asked. My voice came out thinner than I intended. "He'll pick up." She was already reaching for her phone with her free hand, her movements quick and certain now that she had made a decision. A preliminary screen can tell us within 24 to 48 hours whether there's a controlled substance present. It won't be the official result that requires a federal lab, but it will tell us enough to know whether we have a real problem or whether I'm wrong. And if you're wrong, she looked at me over the top of her phone, and the steadiness in her eyes was the most frightening thing I had seen all evening. "Then we laugh about it tomorrow," she said, "and I will happily let you tell this story at every family dinner for the next 20 years. She paused. "But Richard, I don't think I'm wrong." I pushed myself off the olive tree. My legs felt strange beneath me, not weak exactly, but uncertain, as if the ground had shifted slightly and had not yet settled back into place. I looked toward the gap in the hedge where the backyard lights were brightest, where I could make out the shape of Ethan still at the table leaning over to examine something in a gift box, while Daniel pointed at it with exaggerated enthusiasm. My family, my grandson, my son. "We go back in," I said. "We smile, we sing happy birthday, we eat the cake." I turned back to Margaret. "And you call David Reeves." "Already dialing," she said. We walked back through the gap in the hedge together, and I put my hand on the small of my wife's back, the way I had done at 100 parties over the course of our marriage. To anyone watching, we had simply stepped away for a moment of quiet. We were 62 and 59 years old. Couples did that. Nobody looked twice at us. I moved through the rest of the evening on something that felt less like composure and more like controlled momentum, the discipline of a man who had run a company through 3 recessions and 2 industry collapses, and had learned that the most dangerous thing you could do in a crisis was let your face tell the room what your mind was doing. I laughed when laughing was appropriate. I accepted a piece of birthday cake from Ethan himself, who presented it with the gravity of someone conferring an honor, and I told him it was the best chocolate cake I had ever eaten in my 62 years of living. He believed me completely. That almost broke me open right there. When the last guests had gone, and the catering staff were moving quietly through the backyard, collecting glasses, I sat down on the patio steps and looked up at the sky above Beverly Hills, that particular shade of dark that is never quite black, this close to the city, always somewhere between navy and the orange glow of 10 million lights. Margaret came and sat beside me, close enough that her shoulder pressed against mine. "David picked up," she said quietly. "What did he say?" "He said bring him the sample first thing in the morning. He'll run the preliminary screen himself." She exhaled slowly. "He also said, and I want you to hear this clearly, Richard, he said that, if what I described is accurate, the substance profile is consistent with a pharmaceutical-grade sedative compound, not something recreational, not something accidental." The words settled over me like cold water. Pharmaceutical grade. That meant regulated. That meant controlled. That meant whoever had put it in my glass had known exactly what they were doing and had access to something the general public could not simply walk into a store and purchase. I pressed the heels of my hands against my eyes and held them there for a long moment, feeling the pressure grounding myself in the physical sensation of it. "Who had access to that table tonight?" I asked. My voice came out very quiet. Margaret did not answer right away. When she did, she said only, "Let's wait for David's results before we start asking that question." But I was already asking it. I had been asking it since the moment her hand closed around my wrist in the candlelight. I was just not yet ready to hear the answer that was already forming at the back of my mind, patient and terrible, waiting for me to catch up to it. I did not sleep that night. I lay beside Margaret in the dark for what felt like several hours, listening to her breathing slow and deepen into something that resembled rest, though I suspected she was no more asleep than I was. At some point before 4 in the morning, I gave up entirely, pulled on a shirt and a pair of trousers, and walked downstairs to the room I had always called my office, the one with the mahogany desk I had bought at an estate sale in Pasadena, the year Walker Medical Solutions turned its first real profit. The bookshelves that Margaret had organized twice, and I had disorganized 3 times. And the wall of photographs that I had never quite gotten around to arranging properly, but had never been able to bring myself to take down either. I turned on the desk lamp. I did not turn on the overhead light. There was something about the smaller circle of light that felt more honest at 4 in the morning. It illuminated only what was directly in front of you and left everything else in shadow, which seemed about right for the kind of thinking I needed to do. I sat in my chair and looked at the photographs. There was one in the center of the wall that I kept coming back to, a faded shot taken sometime in the early 1990s in a rented workspace off of Cesar Chavez Avenue in East Los Angeles. I was in my early 30s in that photograph, standing in front of a workbench cluttered with medical supply samples, holding up a single signed purchase order like it was a trophy, which at the time it essentially was. That first contract, a modest supply agreement with a small regional clinic in the San Gabriel Valley, had taken me 11 months to secure. 11 months of cold calls and rejected proposals and meetings, where I could see in the other person's eyes that they were humoring me rather than considering me seriously. I remembered the exact weight of that paper in my hands, the way my fingers had trembled slightly as I read it over for the 5th time to make sure I had not misunderstood something. I remembered calling Margaret from a payphone on the corner because I had not yet owned a cell phone, and I remembered the sound she made when I told her, not a scream, not a shout, just this single long exhale, as if she had been holding that breath for 11 months alongside me. We had built everything from that moment forward. 30 years, 3 recessions, 2 industry downturns that had forced me to make decisions I still did not enjoy remembering. Employees I had fought to keep on payroll when the numbers said I should let them go. Contracts I had walked away from because the terms required compromises I was not willing to make. Margaret had stood beside me through every single one of those moments, and I had believed, genuinely believed, with the kind of certainty that does not examine itself too closely, that I had built something worth being proud of. Not just the company, the family. I looked at the photograph of Daniel at his college graduation, 22 years old, grinning so widely his face looked like it might split. I had been standing next to him with my arm around his shoulders, and even in the photograph, you could see that I was gripping him tighter than a casual embrace required. I remembered that day with a precision that surprised me even now. The particular quality of the June light on that campus in Northern California, the way Daniel had kept looking sideways at me during the ceremony, as if checking that I was still there the lunch afterward at a restaurant he had chosen himself, because he wanted to treat me with a gift card he had been saving since Christmas. He had ordered the most expensive thing on the menu, and then looked slightly panicked when the bill arrived, and the gift card did not cover it. I had laughed for 10 minutes straight. He had pretended to be offended, and then laughed along with me. We had split the difference. I pressed my thumb against the corner of that photograph now in the early morning stillness of my office, and felt something move through my chest that I did not have a clean word for. It was not quite grief. It was not quite fear. It was the particular ache of a man who had invested 30 years of love and trust and sacrifice into something, and was beginning to suspect for the first time that he might not have known exactly what he was looking at. Olivia's photograph was 3 frames to the right. She was 26 in that picture, standing in the doorway of the Walker Medical Solutions office on the day she had first come to work for the company. She had insisted on starting from the bottom, her words not mine, and she had been firm enough about it that I had not argued. She spent her first year in the distribution center in Burbank, working alongside the logistics team, learning the supply chain from the ground up, with the same meticulous focus she had applied to everything in her life since she was old enough to read. Within 3 years, she had redesigned our entire procurement process and cut operational costs by nearly a quarter. I had been so proud of her, I could barely speak about it without my voice doing something embarrassing. Looking at that photograph now in the small circle of light from my desk lamp, I tried to find something in her expression that I might have missed. Some signal, some edge, some small sign that the woman smiling in that doorway was capable of standing alone at a drinks table at her nephew's birthday party and reaching into her pocket for something that should never have been anywhere near a family gathering. I could not find it. That was the part that kept snagging in my mind like a hook, not the possibility that she had done it, but the fact that I could look at 30 years of photographs and memories and not see it coming. My phone vibrated on the desk. I grabbed it faster than I had moved for anything in years. The screen showed Margaret's name, and for a half second my heart seized so violently that I had to press my free hand flat against the desk to steady myself. I answered before the second vibration finished. "Margaret, I'm in the kitchen," she said. Her voice was careful in the way it got when she was delivering information she had already processed and was now managing. "David called. The preliminary screen is back." She paused. "He pulled an all-nighter to prioritize it 30 years of favors, called in at once." My mouth had gone completely dry. I could hear the refrigerator running somewhere in the background of her call, the ordinary mechanical hum of a Saturday morning kitchen, and the contrast between that sound and the tightness in my wife's voice made the room feel like it was tilting slightly. "Tell me," I said. "Come downstairs, Richard." A pause, not hesitation, preparation. "I'll tell you in person, but bring yourself, not your assumptions. What I have to say needs you thinking clearly." I set the phone down on the desk. I sat there for one more moment, looking at the wall of photographs, 30 years of a life I had built and believed in, and handed piece by piece to the people I loved most in the world. Then I stood up, turned off the desk lamp, and walked toward the door. The office went dark behind me. Margaret was standing at the kitchen island when I came downstairs. She had made coffee, 2 mugs, both untouched steam rising in thin columns toward the ceiling. The morning light was coming through the east-facing windows in that pale, tentative way it did in late May, not yet warm enough to feel like day still carrying the cool edge of the night before. She was not looking at the coffee. She was looking at her phone, which she had placed face up on the granite counter, and the expression on her face was the one I had been dreading since she called me upstairs. Not panic. Margaret did not panic. What her face was doing was something quieter and more unsettling, the careful inward stillness of a doctor who has received a result she was hoping to be wrong about. "Sit down, Richard," she said without looking up. "I'd rather stand." She looked up then, studied me for a moment, decided not to argue. "David ran the preliminary screen himself," she said, wrapping both hands around her mug without lifting it. "He prioritized it as a personal favor, which means he was in the lab at 6 this morning. He called me 20 minutes ago. She took a slow breath. "The screen came back positive for a sedative compound. The profile is consistent with propofol, specifically a pharmaceutical-grade emulsion formulation." The word propofol hit me like a hand pressed flat against my sternum. I knew that word. I had reviewed it in procurement catalogs and DEA compliance reports and the regulatory documentation that crossed my desk every quarter. Propofol was not aspirin. It was not something you found in a medicine cabinet or ordered online or picked up at a pharmacy with a standard prescription. It was a Schedule IV controlled substance under the Drug Enforcement Administration's classification system, which meant its manufacture, distribution, and possession were federally regulated at every single step of the supply chain. Hospitals used it. Surgical centers used it. Anesthesiologists administered it in carefully measured doses with monitoring equipment standing by. Outside of those environments, it had no legitimate place. And someone had introduced it into a champagne flute at my grandson's birthday party. "That's not something you find on a street corner," I said. My voice sounded strange to me, flat and oddly precise, the way it got sometimes in board meetings, when I was absorbing information I did not yet know how to respond to. To get pharmaceutical-grade propofol, you need DEA registration. You need institutional credentials. You need access to a licensed storage facility with the correct temperature controls and chain of custody documentation. "Yes," Margaret said simply. "Which means whoever put it in my glass had access to a medical supply chain." "Yes." I turned away from her and walked to the window. The backyard was still out there. The olive trees, the folding chairs, the catering company had not yet collected. A handful of deflated balloons tied to the back fence that Ethan had insisted on keeping even after the party ended. The baseball diamond cake was gone. Everything else looked exactly as it had looked 12 hours ago before the world had shifted on its axis and declined to shift back. Walker Medical Solutions has a licensed pharmaceutical storage facility. I said to the window, to the backyard, to the deflated balloons. "We carry controlled substances as part of our distribution contracts. We have DEA registration. We have the infrastructure. Richard Assis. The number of people with authorized access to that inventory is not large." I turned back to face her. My hands were pressed flat against the window frame, and I could feel the coolness of the glass through my palms grounding me. "It's not the general staff. It's not the sales team. The access controls for Schedule 4 inventory require dual authorization at the management level. Margaret set her coffee mug down with a small, careful click. I know, she said. Daniel has authorization, I said. As CEO, he has the highest level of system access in the company. I know. And Olivia. The name came out of my mouth like something I was placing on a surface to examine, rather than something I was saying. As head of the supply chain division, she has direct operational access to every controlled substance in our inventory system. She doesn't just have access. She manages the access controls for everyone else. Margaret walked around the island and stood in front of me. She reached up and put both hands on either side of my face, a gesture she had not made since our children were small, and one of them had come home with a fever that frightened her. Her palms were warm against my jaw, and I became aware that my jaw had been clenched so tightly that a dull ache was spreading up toward my left temple. Listen to me very carefully, she said. David's result is preliminary. It tells us a controlled substance was present. It does not tell us who put it there, or how, or why. The full confirmation will come from a federal laboratory, and that takes longer. We do not act on a preliminary screen alone. Then, what do? We think. Her thumbs pressed gently against my cheekbones. Before we call anyone, before we call the police, before we call a lawyer, before we do anything that cannot be undone, we think. Because if we go to the authorities right now, with what we have, two things happen. One, whoever did this knows immediately that we know. And two, if they have any evidence anywhere that could disappear, it disappears. I pulled her hands from my face, gently held them between mine for a moment, then released them. She was right. I knew she was right. But knowing she was right did not make the alternative standing in my kitchen on a Saturday morning, knowing that someone had tried to put a surgical sedative in my body at a family birthday party, feel anything other than like the floor was slowly dropping away beneath my feet. I need to talk to Daniel, I said. Margaret's expression shifted barely, just a tightening around the eyes that she could not quite suppress. Richard, not an accusation, a conversation. My voice was steadier now, settling into something harder. He is my son, and he is the CEO of this company, and he has the highest level of access to our controlled substance inventory. I am not going to call the FBI before I look my own son in the eye and give him the chance to tell me what he knows. Margaret held my gaze for a long moment. Then she nodded a single slow movement that told me she understood even if she was not certain. I picked up my coffee mug from the counter. It had gone cold while we were talking. I drank it anyway, standing at the kitchen window, looking at the deflated balloons in the backyard, shifting gently in the morning breeze. Then I reached for my phone. Daniel answered on the second ring, his voice carrying that particular roughness of someone who had slept but not well, the voice of a man whose own night had not been entirely peaceful. Dad. A pause, one beat too long. Everything okay? We need to meet, I said. Just the two of us. Today. Don't mention it to anyone. Another pause. Longer this time. The kind of pause that a father with 38 years of knowing his son recognized as something other than simple surprise. Okay, Dad, Daniel said finally. His voice had dropped half a register. I'll be there. I set the phone on the counter and looked at Margaret. She was watching me with her hands clasped in front of her, and her eyes were doing something I did not see in them, often something that looked very much like bracing. We both knew that whatever Daniel was going to tell me this afternoon, some version of our world was going to end before he finished saying it. The only question was how much of it we would be able to salvage from what came after. Daniel arrived at 2 p.m. I heard his car in the driveway before I heard the doorbell, the particular sound of his engine cutting out, followed by a silence that stretched 3 or 4 seconds longer than it should have, as if he sat in the car collecting himself before he could make himself come inside. I opened the door before he could ring the bell. He looked terrible. There were shadows beneath his eyes that had not been there at the party the night before, and his shirt was the same one he had been wearing when he left untucked. Now collar open, the kind of dishevelment that said he had not gone home to sleep so much as gone home to sit in the dark and wait for morning to end. Dad, he said. Come in, I said. We went to my office. I sat behind the desk. He sat across from me in the chair where vendors and partners and difficult conversations had lived for 30 years. I placed the preliminary result from David Reeves on the desk between us and did not say anything. I just let him look at it. Daniel stared at that document for a long time. His jaw worked, his hands resting on his knees curled slowly into fists, and then released once, twice, 3 times, like a man trying to decide whether to hold on to something or let it go. Then he bent forward, put his face in his hands, and wept. Not quietly, not with any of the restraint that 38 years of trying to appear capable in front of his father might have been expected to produce. He wept with his whole body, shoulders heaving breath, coming in ragged pulls, the kind of crying that a grown man does only when he has been holding something unbearable for so long that the weight finally exceeds whatever he has been using to carry it. I sat across from him and felt my heart crack straight down the middle. "Daniel," my voice came out lower than I intended. "Look at me." He lifted his face. His eyes were red and swollen, tears still tracking down both sides of his face, and he looked for just a moment exactly like the 12-year-old boy who had come to me once after breaking a neighbor's window with a baseball and had stood in this same room shaking with the effort of telling me the truth. "I took money from the company," he said. His voice was wrecked. $2.3 million over 14 months. I moved it through internal accounts in increments small enough to avoid the automatic audit flags. He pressed the back of his hand against his mouth, steadying himself. "I had gambling debts, Dad. Bad ones. I built them up over 3 years, and I kept thinking I could fix it myself, and I couldn't." The room felt very still. "Did you put something in my glass last night?" I asked. His head came up so fast he nearly knocked the desk. "No." The word came out like something physical, hard, immediate, no hesitation underneath it. "Dad, I swear to God, I would never—" His voice broke. He pressed both hands flat on the desk and leaned forward, his eyes locked on mine with an intensity I had not seen in him since he was a boy. "I didn't touch your drink. I didn't touch anything. But Dad—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "Say it," I said. Daniel's hands were trembling against the desk. His chest rose and fell in unsteady pulls. He looked like a man standing at the edge of something he could not take back. "I remember now," he said. "Last night before the toast, I saw someone standing alone at the drinks table, right where your glass was. I didn't think anything of it. I had so much of my own weight pressing down on me that I just—" He exhaled a shaking, gutted sound. "It was Olivia, Dad. I saw Olivia standing there alone, right before the MC called everyone forward." The words landed in the room and did not move. I looked at my son, this man I had built a company for, built a life around, loved, with the uncomplicated fierceness that fathers carry for their children, whether those children deserve it in any given moment or not. He had stolen from me. He had lied to me for 14 months. And he was sitting across from me now, with tears drying on his face, telling me the truth with every trembling muscle in his body. I stood up, walked to the window. The afternoon light fell across the backyard in long golden strips, and I stood in it and tried to breathe evenly. "Go home, Daniel," I said quietly. "Don't talk to anyone. Don't call Olivia. Don't call anyone at all. Can you do that?" "Yes," he whispered. "Then go." I listened to his footsteps cross the hallway, listened to the front door open and close, listened to his car start in the driveway. Then I sat back down at my desk, pulled my laptop toward me, and typed a single name into the company's internal access management system. Olivia Walker, Supply Chain and Pharmaceuticals Division, Director, authorization level full. Margaret found me at the desk 2 hours after Daniel left. I had not moved. I had not eaten. I had pulled up Olivia's division files on the internal system and started at the beginning, procurement records distribution, logs, vendor contracts, quality certification reports, working through them, the way I had worked through every difficult problem in 30 years of running this company, methodically, without blinking. Margaret set a plate of food beside the keyboard that I did not touch, pulled a chair around to my side of the desk, and sat down without asking whether I wanted company. That was one of the 10,000 things I loved about her. "Show me," she said. I showed her. The first file looked clean, the second looked clean, the third was where Margaret leaned forward and put her finger on the screen. "That serial number," she said. I looked at where she was pointing. A medical device shipment, 12 units of a portable cardiac monitoring system, received 8 months ago from a vendor in Phoenix, Arizona. The serial numbers on the receiving log did not match the serial numbers on the manufacturer's certification document attached to the same file. "Could be a clerical error," I said. My voice did not believe what it was saying. "Pull the next shipment," Margaret said. I pulled it. Different vendor, different equipment category, different month, same problem. Serial numbers on the physical receiving log diverged from the certification documentation by a pattern that was too consistent to be accidental, as if someone had taken the legitimate paperwork from one batch and attached it to a different one entirely. I pulled 6 more files. Every single one had the same signature on the quality approval line. Olivia Walker, Supply Chain and Pharmaceuticals, Division Director. I pushed back from the desk and pressed both hands over my face. My eyes were burning from the screen, from the hours from something that had nothing to do with either. I could feel the pressure building behind my temples in long, slow pulses, and I sat like that for a moment, just breathing, just trying to keep the shape of the world stable around me. "She's been routing substandard equipment into our distribution system," I said from behind my hands. "Devices that failed certification. She attached legitimate paperwork from approved batches to cover them." "That's what it looks like," Margaret said. Her voice was steady, but when I lowered my hands, I could see that her face had gone the particular shade of pale that it got when she was working very hard not to show how frightened she was. "Those devices went to hospitals, Margaret." My voice cracked on the last word just slightly, just enough. "Clinics, care facilities, people use those monitors on patients." She reached over and covered my hand with hers. Her grip was tight enough to hurt, and I was grateful for it. "Keep going," she said quietly. "We need the full picture before we can do anything useful." I turned back to the screen. The vendor contracts were worse. Not just substandard equipment, the pricing structures were built around shell entities, companies with Nevada registration addresses that resolved to mail forwarding services when I searched them. Every contract had 2 signatories, Olivia Walker on the Walker Medical Solutions side, and on the vendor side, the authorized representative's signature line read the same name over and over across 14 separate agreements: Nathan Cross. I did not recognize that name from our Los Angeles operations. I searched the internal directory. Nathan Cross, Senior Legal Counsel, Walker Medical Solutions, New York office, our own lawyer. Margaret had gone very still beside me. I could hear her breathing measured, deliberate, the way she breathed when she was in a hospital room and needed to stay calm for someone else's sake. I kept scrolling. The further I went into the contract records, the cleaner the construction became. And that was the part that frightened me most. Not sloppiness, precision. Each agreement was structured to distribute liability across multiple entities in a way that made any single document appear routine on its own. You had to hold all 14 in your hands at once before the architecture became visible. Whoever had built this had understood exactly how our internal audit systems worked and had designed specifically around them. Olivia had managed those audit systems for 4 years. I set my hands flat on the desk and stared at the screen without reading it. The office had gone fully dark outside the circle of the desk lamp, and the house around us was quiet in the particular way it got late at night. Not peaceful exactly, but suspended as if the walls were waiting to see what happened next. "Richard," Margaret said, "we need to look at the security footage from Ethan's party." I turned to look at her. "I know what you're thinking," she said before I could speak, "but I need you to see it with your own eyes. Because what comes next, whatever we decide to do, you cannot have a single doubt in your mind when we do it." I looked at her for a long moment. My chest felt like something inside it had been slowly tightening for the past 24 hours and was now approaching the limit of what it could hold. Then I reached for the laptop and opened a new window. The security system for our Beverly Hills home had cloud backup. Every camera, every angle, every timestamp. I typed in the access credentials and pulled up the footage from the previous evening. The timestamp read 7:43 p.m. The camera angle was the kitchen, a wide shot covering the drinks table, the catering station, and the doorway leading out to the backyard. In the lower right corner of the frame, the birthday cake was still visible on the counter, 8 unlit candles standing in a row waiting. The kitchen was empty. Then Olivia walked in. She came through the side door from the hallway, not the backyard entrance, which meant she had come from inside the house rather than from among the guests. She was carrying something small in her right hand, a vial no larger than a perfume sample, the kind of thing that could be palmed completely in a closed fist. She moved directly to the drinks table without pausing, without looking toward the backyard windows, without any of the hesitation that someone doing something innocent would have shown. She picked up one specific glass, not the nearest one, not a random selection. She picked up the flute at the far left of the arrangement, the position I always took at family gatherings, the spot Margaret had set for me that afternoon. While organizing the table, she uncapped the vial. I watched my daughter tip 3 or 4 drops of a white, slightly viscous liquid into my champagne glass. The liquid caught the kitchen light for just a moment before it dispersed into the champagne, leaving the faintest cloudiness near the bottom that would have been invisible to anyone who was not specifically looking for it. She recapped the vial, slipped it back into the pocket of her dress, straightened up, and then Ethan ran into the kitchen. He skidded to a stop when he saw her socks sliding on the tile floor, arms windmilling for balance. 8 years old, wearing his birthday shirt with the baseball on the front cheeks, flushed from running around the backyard. He looked at his aunt with the open, uncomplicated curiosity of a child who had not yet learned to read rooms. Olivia turned to face him, and she smiled warm, easy, completely natural. She crouched down to his level, said something to him. I could not hear the audio clearly over the ambient noise of the party outside, but I watched Ethan's face move through surprise, then consideration, then a small, serious nod, the nod of a child who has just been given a responsibility and intends to take it seriously. Olivia ruffled his hair, took his hand, led him back out to the party. I stopped the footage. My hand was shaking so badly that I knocked the mouse off the desk, reaching for it, and I heard it hit the floor somewhere below me, but I did not look for it. I was looking at the frozen frame on the screen. Olivia's back, Ethan's small hand in hers, the kitchen doorway, the drinks table behind them, with my glass sitting exactly where she had left it. Margaret put her arm around my shoulders. She did not say anything. She pressed her cheek against my temple and held on, and I let her because my chest had compressed to something so tight that I was not entirely sure I was breathing correctly. We sat like that for a long moment before either of us moved. In the morning, after a few hours of shallow, restless sleep, we found Ethan in the kitchen eating cereal. He was still in his pajamas, still wearing the expression of a boy who considered Saturday morning a personal gift from the universe. Daniel had stayed the night I had called him, after seeing the footage, and told him to come back, that he needed to be here for this. And he was sitting across from his son at the breakfast table, holding a coffee mug with both hands and looking like a man who had not slept at all. I sat down beside Ethan. Margaret sat across from us. "Hey, bud," I said. "Can I ask you something about last night?" Ethan looked up from his cereal. "About my birthday. About something you might have seen in the kitchen." I kept my voice easy, unhurried, the voice I used when we were talking about baseball statistics or which flavor of ice cream was objectively the best. "Do you remember going into the kitchen before we sang Happy Birthday?" Ethan thought about it with the genuine concentration that children give to questions they want to answer correctly. "Yeah," he said. "I went to get water." "Did you see anyone in there?" His spoon slowed in the bowl. Something moved across his face, not guilt, not fear, but the particular discomfort of a child who is remembering something that has been sitting uneasily in his chest. "Aunt Olivia was in there," he said carefully. "What was she doing?" Ethan set his spoon down. He looked at his cereal, then at me, then at his father, then back at me. His forehead had creased in the way it did when he was working through something that felt complicated. "She put something in your drink, Grandpa," he said. "She said it was a vitamin surprise. She said it was a secret and I shouldn't tell, or it would ruin it." He paused. His voice dropped to something smaller. "But you looked really scared that night, and I didn't know if it was a good secret or a bad secret. I'm sorry I didn't tell sooner." His chin was trembling. His eyes had gone glassy and bright, and the next breath he took came in with a small, involuntary hitch that broke something open in my chest that I was not sure would ever fully close again. I reached over and pulled him into a hug. He was small against my shoulder, all sharp elbows and cereal smell, and the particular bony warmth of a child who still fits under your arm if you hold on tight enough. "You did nothing wrong," I told him into the top of his head. "You hear me, Ethan. Nothing wrong. This was not your secret to carry. I love you." He nodded against my shoulder. His arms came up and gripped the back of my shirt with both fists. Across the table, Daniel pressed his hand over his mouth. His eyes were red and full, and a single tear ran down the side of his face that he made no move to wipe away. I held my grandson and looked at my son and thought about my daughter and felt the three things exist in me. Simultaneously loved grief and the cold settling weight of certainty without any of them canceling the others out. By Sunday afternoon, I had made 3 decisions. The first was that I was not going to fall apart. I had done the falling apart privately, quietly in the dark of my office the night before, while my grandson slept upstairs, and I had given myself until morning to finish it. The falling apart was done. What came next required a different part of me entirely. The second decision was to hire a financial investigator, not someone from our legal team, not anyone connected to Walker Medical Solutions. I called a man named Gerald Fitch, a forensic accountant I had used once before years ago, during a vendor dispute that had nearly cost us a distribution contract. Gerald was 71 years old, semi-retired, and had the particular quality of mind that could look at a column of numbers and see the story hiding inside them, the way other people saw shapes in clouds. He picked up on the second ring. "Gerald," I said, "I need you. This week. It's serious." "How serious?" he asked. "The kind where I don't want anyone to know I called you." A pause. Then, "I'll clear my schedule." The third decision was New York. Nathan Cross had been our senior legal counsel in the New York office for 6 years. I had hired him, personally, interviewed him twice, checked his references, liked the way he thought on his feet and the way he looked you in the eye when he disagreed with you. I had trusted him the way you trust someone who has earned it gradually through years of competent, unglamorous work. His name was on 14 vendor contracts, every single one linked to a shell entity. Every single one tied to equipment that had moved through our distribution system without legitimate certification. I needed to look at him directly. I needed to see his face before I decided what kind of man he was in this story. Gerald called back Monday evening with a preliminary picture that made my stomach turn over. 4 companies, he said without preamble, all registered in Nevada within the past 26 months, all showing the same registered agent, a law firm in Henderson that specializes in anonymous incorporation. The money flows in from Walker Medical Solutions. Vendor payments moves through the Nevada entities and exits into 2 offshore accounts, one in the Cayman Islands, one in the Isle of Man. "How much?" I asked. "In total disbursements over 26 months, Gerald paused. "A little over $1.8 million. I was standing at the window of my home office. The evening light was going gold over the garden, long and soft, the kind of light that made everything look gentle and unhurried. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass and closed my eyes. "Nathan Cross's signature is on every contract," I said. "But the money, where does it land?" "The offshore accounts are structured to obscure the beneficial owner," Gerald said carefully. "I can't confirm names without a federal subpoena, but I can tell you that the transaction patterns, the timing, the amounts, the routing are consistent with someone managing this from inside your supply chain operation rather than from the legal side." I understood what he was not saying. Nathan Cross was signing, but someone else was directing. I thanked Gerald and told him to keep going. Then I booked a flight to JFK Tuesday morning, 6:15 first class, because I was 62 years old, and my back could not handle a red-eye in coach anymore, and some indulgences were simply non-negotiable. Margaret was in the doorway when I turned around. "New York," she said. It was not a question. "Tuesday." She crossed the room and stood in front of me, and I could see in her face that she had already worked through the argument she wanted to make and had decided not to make it. "What are you expecting to find when you walk into his office?" she asked instead. "I don't know," I said honestly. "A man who's been running this operation from the legal side and is going to lawyer up the second he sees me. Or," I stopped. "Or," Margaret pressed, "or something I'm not expecting." I reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, a small automatic gesture from 35 years of marriage. "Which is why I have to go in person, because you can't see which one it is over a phone call." She caught my hand before I could lower it and held it against her cheek for a moment. Her skin was warm. I could feel the tension in her jaw, the way she was holding it still with effort. "I need you here," I said quietly. "With Ethan, with Daniel. Someone has to hold this family together while I go find out what's left of it." Her eyes went bright for just a moment, that particular brightness that was not quite tears, but was close enough that it meant something. She pressed my hand harder against her cheek, then released it. "Come back with answers," she said. "Not assumptions, answers." "Yes," I said. I did not sleep well that night either. I lay in the dark and thought about Nathan Cross. His handshake, his file, the 6 years of competent, unremarkable work that had made me stop paying close attention to him. I thought about what a man like that would look like when Richard Walker walked through his door unannounced. I thought about what I would do if his face told me what I was afraid it was going to tell me. And then I thought about Olivia, about the footage, about the vial, about the smooth, unhurried way she had moved through that kitchen, as if she had rehearsed it, and I realized that whatever Nathan Cross's face told me, it was not going to be the most frightening thing I had learned this week. That distinction was already taken. Before I tell you what happened when I walked into that New York office, I need to know if you're still with me. If you're listening to this story on Revenge Dad, right now, drop the number 9 in the comments below. Just 9. So I know you're here with me. A quick note, like all stories on revenge. Dad, this one contains fictional elements woven in for storytelling and educational purposes. Some details have been shaped for the narrative, if that's not what you're looking for. Today, you're welcome to step away at any time. No hard feelings at all. The building was on 6th Avenue, 43 stories of glass and steel that caught the morning light and threw it back at the street in hard, bright angles. I had been to the New York office twice in 6 years, once for the ribbon cutting, when we opened it once for a client dinner that had run until midnight and left me eating room service alone in a midtown hotel at 1 in the morning. Both times I had taken the elevator to the 31st floor and walked through glass doors with the Walker Medical Solutions logo etched into them and felt the particular satisfaction of a man who had built something large enough to require a New York address. I did not feel that satisfaction today. The elevator opened onto a reception area where a young woman looked up from her desk with a professional smile that faltered slightly when she registered my expression. "Mr. Walker?" she said, recovering quickly. "I wasn't aware you were coming in today." "No," I said. "You weren't. Is Nathan in?" Yes, he's in. Let me just." "Don't call ahead," I said. "I'll knock." She opened her mouth and then closed it again, which was the right decision. I walked down the corridor to Nathan's office. His name was on the door, in the same sans serif font as every other nameplate in this building, understated and precise, the kind of man who had always seemed exactly as advertised. I raised my hand to knock, and then I stopped, because I could hear through the door that the office was quiet, not the quiet of someone on a call or deep in a document, the quiet of someone sitting and waiting, the particular stillness of a room that has been holding its breath. I knocked twice and opened the door. Nathan Cross was sitting behind his desk, with his hands folded in front of him and his eyes on the door, as if he had been watching it for some time. He was 55 years old, gray at the temples, with the kind of face that had been handsome once and had settled into something more interesting, lined and careful, and at this particular moment, carrying an expression I had not expected to find. Not guilt, not alarm, relief. He stood up when he saw me. His hands unfolded from the desk, and he straightened to his full height, and there was something in the way he held himself. The loosening of attention that had been in place for a very long time that stopped me 3 steps into the room. "Mr. Walker," he said. His voice was steady, but underneath it I could hear the faint roughness of a man who had not been sleeping. "I've been waiting for you." I stared at him. "She told me you'd never figure it out," he said. She was very confident about that. I'm glad she was wrong. My hand found the back of the nearest chair. I gripped it hard enough to feel the edge of the frame against my palm. "Sit down, Nathan," I said, "and start talking." He sat. I sat. And for the next 40 minutes, Nathan Cross told me everything. It had started 18 months ago. Olivia had approached him with what appeared to be a straightforward request. She needed legal support for a series of vendor agreements she was developing. He had seen nothing unusual in the initial paperwork. Supply chain contracts, vendor due diligence, standard commercial terms. He had reviewed them and signed where he was asked to sign. 3 months in, she had come to his office and closed the door. "She put a file on my desk," Nathan said. His jaw tightened. "Documents, financial records, emails, a series of transactions dated 4 years back. All under my name. All fabricated. I knew immediately they were fabricated because I knew what I had and hadn't done. But they were good, Mr. Walker. Very good. The kind of thing that could take 2 years and everything I owned to disprove, and even then..." He stopped, pressed his lips together. "I have a wife, 2 daughters. The older one starts college next year. The younger one has medical bills that..." He cut himself off again, shaking his head. "She knew exactly what she was doing. She chose me because she knew exactly where to press. I felt sick in a way that had nothing to do with the flight." "So you kept signing?" I said. "I kept signing." The words came out like something he had been carrying in his chest for a very long time and was finally setting down. "And I kept records. Every email she sent me. Every phone call I took from her in this office, New York, is one-party consent, which means I had the legal right to record any call I was a party to without notifying her. She always called me from her New York trips, or from the company's internal line, never from a personal number I could trace back to California. I don't know if that was deliberate. I suspect it was. I have 61 recordings, Mr. Walker. I have every email, every instruction she gave me in writing for 18 months. He opened the bottom drawer of his desk. He placed a USB drive on the desk between us. Black, small, unremarkable, the kind of thing you could lose in a coat pocket and forget for a week. Everything is on there, Nathan said. Every recording, every email chain, every transaction log with her instructions attached. I kept copies of everything from the beginning because I knew that eventually someone was going to come through that door. He looked at me directly and his eyes were red at the edges in a way that told me the relief I had seen when I walked in was real and had been a long time coming. I just didn't know if it would be law enforcement or you. I'm glad it was you first. I looked at the USB drive on the desk between us. Small enough to hold in a closed fist. Heavy enough, potentially, to end everything. Why didn't you come to me? I asked. My voice came out rougher than I intended. 18 months, Nathan. Why didn't you pick up the phone? He met my eyes without flinching. Because she told me that if I contacted you directly, the fabricated documents would be in the hands of the New York Bar Association and my wife's attorney within 24 hours. He exhaled slowly. And because I was afraid, Mr. Walker, I was simply straightforwardly afraid. And fear makes people do things they are not proud of. I reached across the desk and picked up the USB drive. It weighed almost nothing. I turned it over once in my hand, feeling the smooth plastic casing, thinking about 61 recordings, and 18 months of a man sitting in this office signing his name to things that were going to cost him sleep for the rest of his life. You'll cooperate fully, I said. With the FBI when the time comes, everything you have, everything you know. Everything, Nathan said, without hesitation. I have been waiting to say that word for a very long time. I put the drive in my jacket pocket and stood up. My legs were steadier than I expected them to be. Something had shifted in the past 40 minutes, not comfort, not relief, but the particular solidity that comes when the shape of a thing becomes clear enough to act on. I knew now what I was dealing with. I knew its edges and its weight. I extended my hand across the desk. Nathan Cross shook it. His grip was firm and his eyes were wet, and he held on 1 second longer than a professional handshake required. I did not mind. The hotel room was on the 24th floor, facing south with a view of Midtown, that on any other day I might have stood at the window and appreciated. I did not stand at the window. I sat at the desk, opened my laptop, inserted the USB drive Nathan had given me, and started reading. The files were organized with the same meticulous precision that had made Nathan Cross an effective lawyer for 6 years, folders labeled by date subfolders, by transaction type. Every email threaded with its full chain of correspondence, every audio recording, named with the date, time, and a brief description of the subject discussed. 61 recordings, hundreds of emails. Transaction logs cross-referenced with the shell company, disbursements Gerald Fitch had already mapped. I worked through it methodically the way I worked through everything, and with each file I opened, the picture became clearer and more complete, and considerably worse than I had imagined it when I boarded the plane that morning. The scale was not what stopped me cold. It was a folder near the bottom of the drive, labeled simply, Before WMS. I stared at those 2 words for a moment. Before Walker Medical Solutions. Before Olivia came to work for me. I moved the cursor over the folder and felt something tighten in my chest that I could not name, precisely not quite dread, not quite premonition, but the particular sensation of a man who is about to open a door he cannot close again. I clicked. Inside were 3 documents and 2 email threads. The documents were internal communications from a company called Pacific Med Group, a pharmaceutical distribution firm based in San Francisco that I had never heard of. The email threads were between Olivia and an address I did not recognize, and the language in them was careful and indirect in a way that, after 2 days of reading Olivia's communications, I had learned to translate. I opened the first email thread, read it twice. Then I closed the laptop, stood up, walked to the window, and stood there for a full minute looking at the Manhattan skyline without seeing any of it. Then I sat back down and opened the laptop again because looking away was not something I was going to allow myself to do. Pacific Med Group had collapsed 14 months after Olivia left. The official record, I found it in a California Secretary of State, filing within 20 minutes of searching, listed the cause as operational mismanagement and cash flow failure. Standard language. the kind of language that covered a multitude of sins without specifying any of them. I called Gerald Fitch. Pacific Med Group, I said when he picked up. San Francisco, pharmaceutical distribution. They went under approximately 3 years ago. I need everything you can find on the circumstances. How fast? Tonight if possible. Buy me dinner, Gerald said and hung up. While I waited, I found the name of Pacific Med Group's former legal counsel through a California State Bar directory. Search a woman named Patricia Ellsworth, now in private practice in Palo Alto. I called her office, got her voicemail, left a message identifying myself and asking her to call me back on a matter involving a former mutual associate. She called back in 40 minutes. Mr. Walker, see, she said, and her voice had a particular careful quality that told me she had already decided how much she was willing to say. I remember Pacific Med Group well. It was a difficult situation. I'm interested in the period before the company's closure, I said, specifically the tenure of a supply chain executive named Olivia Walker. A pause, longer than the question required. Ms. Walker was with Pacific Med Group for 14 months, Patricia Ellsworth said, finally. She left approximately 6 weeks before the first major irregularities came to light. And the CEO, I said. Harold Simmons. Another pause, the careful kind. He's not well, she said. He had a significant health event approximately 3 months after the company closed. He's been in a care facility in Marin County for the past 2 years. His family, she stopped. I don't think it would be appropriate for me to say more than that. I thanked her and ended the call. I sat in the hotel room on the 24th floor of a Midtown Manhattan building and looked at the wall and thought about Harold Simmons, a man I had never met in a care facility in Marin County, not recognizing his own family. A man who had been 60 years old and running a pharmaceutical company when Olivia Walker joined his supply chain division. A man who had experienced a significant health event approximately 3 months after she left. The same timeline, the same industry, the same position. Gerald called back at 9:15 with a summary that confirmed what the email threads had already suggested. Irregular procurement patterns, vendor contracts that dissolved the moment the company closed, financial structures that bore a striking resemblance to the shell company architecture he had been mapping in our own records. I did not throw anything. I did not raise my voice. I sat at the desk in a hotel room 24 floors above Midtown Manhattan, and I pressed both hands flat against the surface in front of me, and I breathed. I was not the first. That was the thought that kept arriving over and over with the persistence of something that needed to be fully understood before it would stop. I was not the first man Olivia had done this to. Harold Simmons had been there before me, in a different city, in a different company, and no one had stopped it. No one had even seen it clearly enough to name it until it was too late for Harold Simmons to benefit from the naming. I picked up my phone and called Margaret. She answered before the first ring had finished, which told me she had been holding the phone. Richard, her voice was tight. What did you find? More than I expected, I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. Margaret, she's done this before. There's a man in San Francisco named Harold Simmons. He ran a company called Pacific Med Group. He's in a care facility in Marin County now. Has been for 2 years. He can't... I stopped. Cleared my throat. Started again. He can't recognize his own family anymore. The silence on Margaret's end lasted 4 seconds. I counted them. Come home, Richard, she said. Her voice was very quiet and very certain. Come home and we end this. All of it. I looked at the USB drive sitting beside my laptop. I looked at the notepad where I had written Harold Simmons' name and drawn a line underneath it. I'll be on the first flight tomorrow morning, I said. I ended the call. Sat in the quiet of the hotel room. Outside 24 floors down New York kept moving the way New York always moved, without pause, without acknowledgement, without any particular interest in the weight of what one man was carrying in a room above it. I thought about Harold Simmons. I thought about Ethan blowing out his birthday candles. And I thought about what it meant that the only reason I was sitting in this hotel room, instead of a care facility in Marin County, was that I had married a woman who had spent 30 years learning to see what other people missed. Margaret had not told me she was going to call Carol Hines. I found out when I walked through the front door at 7:30 that evening, still carrying my overnight bag, still wearing the jacket I had put on at 6 in the morning in a midtown hotel room, and found the two of them sitting across from each other at the kitchen table with cups of tea that had gone cold between them. Carol Hines was 55 years old, with silver-streaked hair. She kept pulled back and the kind of posture that came from decades of standing in front of review boards and hospital committees, straight composed, professionally correct. I had hired her 4 years ago, specifically because of that quality. She had a reputation in the medical device industry for being the person who did not sign things she had not verified personally, who pushed back on timelines that compromised safety standards, who had once walked out of a contract negotiation because the other party had tried to pressure her into approving documentation she considered incomplete. She was the last person I would have expected to sign her name to a fraudulent certification report, and she was sitting at my kitchen table looking like a woman who had not slept properly in 8 months. When she saw me in the doorway, her spine, which had been perfectly straight, seemed to compress slightly, as if something inside her had been holding itself rigid for so long that the sight of me walking through that door had finally allowed it to release. Her hands came up from her lap and wrapped around her cold tea mug, and I could see from across the room that her knuckles were white. "Dr. Hines," I said. "Mr. Walker." Her voice was steady. Her eyes were not. I set my bag down in the hallway and came to the table. Margaret looked at me with an expression that said she would explain everything later and that I should sit down and listen first, which was the correct order of operations. And I knew it. I sat down. I waited. Carol looked at Margaret. Margaret gave her the smallest nod, the kind that passes between two women who have been talking for long enough to reach an understanding. Carol looked back at me. She took a breath that was longer and more deliberate than normal breathing required. "I need to tell you something that I should have told you 8 months ago," she said. "And I need you to understand that I know that. I am not going to ask you to excuse it. I am just going to tell you what happened and give you what I have and let you decide what to do with it." "All right," I said. She told me. Olivia had come to her office on a Tuesday morning in October, 8 months prior. She had closed the door, sat down across from Carol's desk, and placed a single photograph on the surface between them. The photograph was of a man Carol's brother, as it turned out a 61-year-old retired schoolteacher named Frank, who was currently receiving treatment at a long-term care facility in Riverside County for early-stage Parkinson's disease. The facility was licensed and partially funded through a state health program that had a contractual relationship with Walker Medical Solutions distribution network. "She didn't threaten Frank directly," Carol said. Her voice was flat, with the particular flatness of someone recounting something they have rehearsed in their own mind many times. "She was too careful for that. She said she wanted me to understand how interconnected things were, how a disruption in our distribution contracts could affect facilities that depended on our supply chain, how quickly licensing complications could create gaps in care." She stopped. Her jaw worked for a moment. She said she was sure I understood the importance of consistency, of keeping things running smoothly, of not raising unnecessary alarms. "She never said Frank's name directly," I said. "She didn't have to." Carol's voice cracked just slightly, just once, before she pulled it back under control. She put the photograph on my desk, and she smiled at me, and she said she knew I was someone who understood how to protect the people who mattered to her. And then she left. Margaret reached across the table and put her hand over Carol's. Carol looked down at it for a moment, then back up at me, and I could see that her eyes were bright and overfull in a way she was working very hard to manage. Every time she came to me with a certification report that didn't match the physical inventory, Carol continued, "I thought about Frank. Every time I signed my name to something I knew was wrong, I thought about what a gap in his care would mean, what it would cost my family, what it would cost him." Her voice dropped to something barely above a whisper. "I told myself it was temporary, that I would find another way, that I would figure out how to stop it without putting him at risk." She pressed her lips together. "I never figured it out." "Until Margaret called you," I said. Carol nodded. Her grip on the tea mug tightened and released. "Your wife didn't call me as an investigator," she said, glancing at Margaret with something in her face that was close to gratitude. "She called me as a doctor. She told me she was worried about me. She asked if I was all right." Carol let out a breath that was slightly uneven at the edges. Nobody had asked me that in 8 months. It was harder to hold on to than I expected. She reached into the bag beside her chair and placed 2 items on the table. The first was a manila folder, thick with paper's original quality certification reports, the unaltered versions, with her actual assessments intact. Reports that showed exactly which equipment lots had failed standard review and exactly how those failures had subsequently been covered by falsified documentation bearing her forged signature. The second was a small notebook spiral-bound, the kind sold at any drugstore. She had been keeping it since the first Tuesday in October, a handwritten record of every interaction with Olivia, every document she had been pressured to sign, every date and time and instruction recorded in the neat, precise handwriting of a woman who had spent her career knowing that the only protection against false accusation was an accurate record. I picked up the notebook, opened it to the first page. October 7th. OW came to my office at 9:15 a.m., closed the door, placed photograph of FH on desk without explanation. I closed the notebook. My chest felt like something inside it had been slowly filling with cold water for the past 5 days and had now reached the point where there was no more room. Dr. Hines, I said. My voice came out rougher than I intended. What Olivia did to you was not your fault. She chose you specifically because she knew where you were vulnerable. That is not a reflection of weakness. That is a reflection of how calculated she was. Carol pressed her hand over her mouth. Her shoulders shook once, just once, before she steadied herself. 2 tears ran down her face that she did not wipe away, as if stopping to wipe them would cost her the composure she was working so hard to maintain. I should have found another way, she said from behind her hand. Maybe, I said, but you're here now, and that took something. Margaret squeezed Carol's hand. Carol nodded, small, tight, the nod of someone accepting something they are not fully able to receive yet. I looked at the table in front of me, the manila folder, the spiral notebook, the USB drive from Nathan still in my jacket pocket, the footage on the cloud server at home, Ethan's words on a Sunday morning over a bowl of cereal. I looked at Margaret. It's time to call the FBI, I said. She had already reached for her phone. Agent Patricia Doyle did not look like what I had expected. I had expected someone younger, someone with the particular energy of a person who still believed that every case was winnable. What walked through my front door on Thursday morning was a woman of 45 with close-cropped gray hair, reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, and the unhurried manner of someone who had been doing this long enough to know that rushing the first conversation was how you missed the details that broke a case open later. She sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Carol Hines had sat the night before, and she went through everything, every document, every recording from Nathan's USB, the footage from the security system, Carol's certification files, and her spiral notebook, the Pacific Med Group research on Harold Simmons, Gerald Fitch's financial mapping of the shell companies. She read without expression. She asked precise, brief questions. She took notes in a handwriting so small I could not read it from across the table. When she finished, she set her pen down and looked at me. Mr. Walker, she said, in 20 years of investigating pharmaceutical and medical device fraud, this is one of the most thoroughly documented cases I have reviewed at the pre-arrest stage. Your wife, your lawyer, and your quality director each kept independent records that corroborate each other without coordination. That is, she paused, choosing her word, unusual. Is it enough? I asked. It's enough, she said. We'll need 2 weeks to run our own verification through the federal lab and coordinate with the FDA on the device recall protocols. But yes, it's enough. The FDA moved quickly. Within 48 hours of our meeting, they had placed a remote administrative hold on Walker Medical Solutions' distribution database, a legal mechanism that prevented any file modification without federal authorization. Olivia could not delete, alter, or transfer a single document without triggering an automatic alert to the FDA's Office of Criminal Investigations. The forensic interview of Ethan was conducted on Friday morning by a specialist from the FBI's Child Advocacy Unit, a calm, soft-spoken woman who met with Ethan in our living room with toys on the coffee table and Margaret sitting nearby. The interview lasted 35 minutes. Ethan talked about his birthday party, about his Aunt Olivia, about the vitamin surprise with the straightforward clarity of a child who had been carrying a question and was finally being allowed to put it down. The specialist recorded everything. The footage was logged as federal evidence. I watched from the hallway through the gap in the door and felt my heart do something complicated that I did not have a clean word for. The board meeting was scheduled for the second Friday of June, framed in the official notice as a routine governance review. All 8 board members were notified. Olivia received her copy at 11:15 on a Tuesday morning. I knew because Agent Doyle had someone watching. Olivia read the notice, set it on her desk, picked up her phone, and made a call that lasted 4 minutes. Then she smiled the particular smile of someone who believed they were several moves ahead of everyone else in the room. She did not request a postponement. She did not call in sick. She did not book a flight to anywhere. And that the fact that she knew, and still chose to walk in, was the part that kept me awake the night before the board meeting more than anything else had. Olivia knew. Agent Doyle had confirmed it. A partial intercept through the company's internal phone system, which Walker Medical Solutions owned, and therefore had full legal authority to monitor, had captured enough of a conversation to confirm that Olivia was aware an investigation was in progress. She had not panicked. She had not run. She had simply smiled and made a phone call and continued to show up to work every day for 2 weeks, as if the ground beneath her was perfectly solid. She's not going to run. I told Agent Doyle the night before the board meeting. We were sitting in my home office going over the sequence of events one final time. No, Doyle agreed. She's not. She has something prepared, I said. A countermove. Something she believes is strong enough to neutralize whatever we bring into that room. Doyle looked at me steadily. Does that change what you want to do? I thought about Harold Simmons in a care facility in Marin County. I thought about Carol Hines signing her name to documents that made her sick for 8 months. I thought about Nathan Cross sitting in a New York office for 1.5 years waiting for someone to come looking. I thought about Ethan's face in the hallway the morning he told me about the vitamin surprise. No, I said, it doesn't change anything. Doyle nodded once. Then we proceed as planned. She closed her folder and stood up. I want to be clear about something, Mr. Walker. We could arrest her tonight. The warrant is ready. But if we do it quietly, her attorney files for dismissal on procedural grounds within 48 hours, and the board never sees what she was willing to say in that room when she thought she still had the advantage. Let her walk in tomorrow, believing she's ahead. Whatever she presents to the board becomes part of the federal record, and it will make the case stronger. She paused, looking toward the door. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. I did not get much sleep. But when the alarm went off at 6 the next morning, I was already dressed. The elevator opened onto the 28th floor at 8:55 in the morning. I had taken this elevator hundreds of times. I knew the particular lurch it made between the 14th and 15th floors, the way the doors hesitated for half a second before opening all the way, the faint hum of the cable system that you could feel in your feet if you stood still enough. I had never paid attention to any of it before. I paid attention to all of it now. The way you pay attention to ordinary things, when you understand that after today they will not feel ordinary again. The boardroom was at the end of the corridor. Glass walls, a long oval table and dark walnut 8 chairs on each side and one at each end. I had sat at the head of that table for 20 years. I knew the view from that chair the way I knew the view from my own bedroom window. 8 board members were already seated when I walked in. They looked up with the particular mix of curiosity and unease that people carry when they have been called to an urgent meeting without a full explanation. I had given them enough to come a governance review, a matter requiring immediate board attention and nothing more. Daniel was already there, sitting 2 chairs from the far end, his hands flat on the table in front of him. He was wearing a dark suit and a tie he had straightened so many times the knot had gone slightly off-center. When he saw me, he did not smile. He held my gaze for a moment and then looked back down at his hands, and I understood that he had made his decision and was simply waiting for the moment to arrive. Olivia came in at 9 o'clock exactly. She was wearing the charcoal blazer she wore when she wanted to project authority. I had seen her put it on before difficult negotiations, before presentations, where she needed the room to take her seriously from the first sentence. She carried a leather portfolio under one arm and walked to her usual seat with the ease of a woman who had decided somewhere between her car and this corridor that she was going to own this room. She met my eyes when she sat down. Her expression was composed and professional, and underneath it, if you knew her, the way a father knows a daughter, there was something else, a brightness that did not come from confidence alone. It came from certainty, the particular certainty of someone who believes they are holding the winning hand. I called the meeting to order. I presented the agenda, a governance review, financial irregularities requiring board action, personnel matters. Standard language deliberately flat. 4 of the board members had their pens out before I finished the first sentence. Then I asked Daniel to speak. He stood up slowly. He buttoned his jacket, which was a habit he had had since his first board presentation 12 years ago, When he had been so nervous, he had knocked a water glass off the table. He did not look nervous now. He looked like a man who had decided that the only thing left available to him was honesty and had made his peace with what that cost. "I have to tell this board something that I should have brought forward months ago," Daniel said. His voice was steady, though I could hear beneath it the effort that steadiness required. Over the past 14 months, I made a series of unauthorized transfers from company operating accounts. The total amount was $2.3 million. I moved it in increments to avoid triggering the automatic audit systems. I used it to cover personal debts that I had accumulated and hidden from everyone in this room, including my father. The boardroom went very quiet. Not the quiet of people who had nothing to say. The quiet of people absorbing something that had just fundamentally rearranged their understanding of the last 14 months. "I am not asking for leniency," Daniel continued. "I am asking for the opportunity to be honest, because it is the only thing I have left to offer. I will cooperate fully with any investigation, internal or federal. I will provide complete documentation of every transaction. And I will—" His voice broke just slightly, just enough. He pressed his lips together and recovered. "I will spend the rest of my working life making this right if that is what is required of me." He sat down. 2 board members looked at me. 3 looked at the table. 1 looked at Olivia. Olivia was looking at her portfolio, and then she opened it. She stood up with the smooth, unhurried motion of someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment. She placed a stack of documents on the table, not a thin folder, not a few pages, but a substantial organized tabbed collection that landed with a weight that drew every eye in the room. "Before this board takes any action," she said, her voice carrying the precise, measured confidence of someone who has rehearsed this sentence until it no longer sounds rehearsed. "I need you to look at what I've put in front of you." She walked the length of the table, distributing copies to each board member with the efficiency of someone who had done this before. "What you're holding is documentation of a pattern of behavior that began not with Daniel and not with me, but with our father." She paused. "Let that land. For the past 8 months, Richard Walker has been systematically constructing a case designed to remove me from this company and consolidate his control over the board before his planned retirement. The financial irregularities you've just heard about, they exist because he created the conditions for them to exist. The vendor contracts you may have questions about authorized at the executive level, by him." 3 board members were reading. 2 had looked up at me. The temperature in the room had changed. I sat at the head of the table and felt the shift, the particular shift that happens when a room that was aligned in one direction begins to reconsider. Olivia had prepared this carefully. The documents were convincing enough to create doubt, which was all she needed. Doubt was a wedge. A wedge in the right place could split anything. She looked at me from the far end of the table. Her eyes were bright and certain, and completely, absolutely sure of themselves. "My father," she said, "is not the victim in this story." I let her finish. I let the room sit with it for exactly 10 seconds, long enough for the doubt to settle, not long enough for it to take root. Then I looked at the board member nearest the door and nodded once. "Before we continue," I said, "I'd like everyone to look at the screen." The screen at the far end of the boardroom came to life. The footage was time-stamped in the lower right corner, May 23rd, 7:43 p.m., and the image quality was sharp enough that every detail was clear under the kitchen lighting of our Beverly Hills home. The camera angle covered the drinks table, the catering station, the doorway to the backyard. For 2 seconds, the kitchen was empty. Then Olivia walked in. I watched the board members watch the screen. I watched the moment land on each of them differently. The one nearest the window went very still, his pen stopping mid-note. The woman across from him looked at the screen, then at Olivia, then back at the screen, with the expression of someone whose mind was working faster than she wanted it to. The 3 members who had been reading Olivia's documents set them down one by one without being asked. On the screen, Olivia moved to the drinks table, selected one specific glass, uncapped the small vial in her right hand. She did not hesitate. She did not look toward the backyard windows. She poured with the calm, deliberate efficiency of someone performing a task she had rehearsed until it no longer required thought. The room was completely, absolutely silent. I looked at Olivia. She was watching the screen. The composure she had carried into this room, the charcoal blazer, the leather portfolio, The measured voice that had accused me of orchestrating everything was coming apart in increments so small that someone who did not know her face the way I knew it might have missed them entirely. A tightening around the jaw, a single slow blink. The particular stillness of a person who has just understood that the ground they were standing on was not ground at all. When the footage ended, I nodded to the board member nearest the laptop. The second video began. It had been recorded in our living room 9 days ago on a Friday morning by a specialist from the FBI's Child Advocacy Unit. The room in the video was arranged with the deliberate casualness of a professional who understood how to make a child feel safe. Soft chairs, a low coffee table with a few toys that Ethan had initially ignored and then gradually picked up without noticing. Margaret was visible at the edge of the frame, sitting quietly present without participating. Ethan's voice filled the boardroom. He spoke the way 8-year-olds speak when they are telling the truth about something that has been sitting in their chest directly without embellishment, with the particular gravity of a child who understands that the grown-ups in the room need to hear what he is saying. He talked about his birthday party, about going into the kitchen for water, about seeing Aunt Olivia standing at the drinks table alone, about the small bottle in her hand and what she had told him afterward, that it was a vitamin surprise for Grandpa, that it was their secret that he should not tell or it would ruin it. But Grandpa looked really scared that night, Ethan's voice said from the screen in the quiet of the boardroom. And I didn't know if it was a good secret or a bad secret. I kept thinking about it. I'm sorry I didn't say something sooner, Grandpa. His voice on that last sentence carried the weight of 9 days of a child trying to understand whether he had done something wrong. I pressed my thumb hard against the edge of the table and held it there. I did not look at Olivia. I did not need to. Agent Doyle stepped into the room. She had been waiting in the corridor. I had not seen her come in, had only been aware peripherally of the door opening behind me. She was accompanied by 2 agents I did not know, both in dark suits, both moving with the unhurried precision of people who had done this before and understood that speed was less important than certainty. Doyle placed a document on the table in front of the nearest board member, a federal warrant, the seal visible from where I was sitting. Then she looked at Olivia. "Ms. Walker," she said, "I'm Special Agent Patricia Doyle with the FBI's Healthcare Fraud Unit. I have a federal warrant for your arrest on charges including healthcare fraud, distribution of adulterated medical devices, tampering with a consumer product, and extortion. You have the right to remain silent." Olivia stood up. Not because she was told to. She stood up the way people stand when their legs decide, before their mind does, abruptly with a slight unsteadiness that she corrected immediately by pressing one hand flat against the table. She looked at me. The certainty that had been in her eyes when she walked into this room was gone. In its place was something I had never seen in my daughter's face before, not in 34 years of watching that face across dinner tables and in hospital waiting rooms and at birthday parties and graduations and every ordinary and extraordinary moment that a father accumulates over a lifetime. She looked for the first time like someone who had run out of moves. "You were supposed to be gone, Dad," she said. Her voice was very quiet. Not angry, not defiant, just quiet and slightly bewildered, the way people sound when the version of events they have been living inside has just collapsed and they have not yet found the next thing to hold on to. "I just needed more time." I looked at my daughter. My chest was doing something I could not control and did not try to. My eyes were burning in a way that I acknowledged and then set aside because there would be time for that later, and this was not the moment. "I know," I said. It was the only true thing I could find to say. The handcuffs were applied quickly and without drama. Olivia did not resist. She stood straight. That was the thing I would carry with me longest. From that room, the fact that even in that moment she stood straight and let Agent Doyle guide her toward the door. At the threshold, she stopped. She looked back at the boardroom, at the oval table, and the board members and the screen where her nephew's voice had just dismantled everything she had built, and something moved across her face that I could not name and did not try to. Then the door closed behind her. I sat at the head of the table in the room my father had never seen and my daughter had just left in handcuffs, and I looked at the screen which had gone dark, and I waited for something, relief, satisfaction, the clean feeling of a problem resolved to arrive. It did not arrive. What arrived instead was a tiredness so profound it felt less like exhaustion and more like the end of something. The end of a version of my family I had believed in completely. The end of a version of myself, the one who had built all of this and handed it over, and trusted without examining that I was not sure I would be able to fully reconstruct. Margaret's hand found mine under the table. I had not heard her come in. I did not know when she had arrived, but her hand was there warm and certain, and I held onto it the way you hold on to things when the ground has shifted, and you are not yet sure where the solid parts are. The lobby of Walker Medical Solutions occupied the entire ground floor of the building. I had designed it that way deliberately 30 years ago, when I had finally moved the company out of the rented workspace on Cesar Chavez Avenue and into a building that belonged to us. I had wanted the lobby to feel open high ceilings, natural light through floor-to-ceiling windows, the company name etched in brushed steel above the reception desk in letters large enough to read from the street. I had wanted anyone who walked through those doors to understand immediately that this was a place built to last. I took the stairs down from the 28th floor. I did not take the elevator because I needed the 28 flights to do something with the feeling that had been sitting in my chest since the boardroom door closed, and walking seemed like the only tool available to me. Margaret came with me one step behind her hand, occasionally finding my elbow on the landings, as if checking that I was still there. We reached the lobby at the same moment the elevator on the far side opened. Olivia came out first. She was flanked by Agent Doyle on her left and one of the other agents on her right, and her wrists were in front of her. And she was walking the way she had always walked, with her chin level and her shoulders back and her stride unhurried as if the pace was her own choice. She had fixed her posture somewhere between the 28th floor and the 1st, and she was not going to surrender it now, and part of me, the part that had watched her walk into every difficult room of her life with exactly that. Baring recognized it and felt something that had no clean name. The lobby was not empty. It was a Friday afternoon, and Walker Medical Solutions employed 214 people in this building, and somewhere between the board meeting and this moment, the word had moved through the floors, the way words move in buildings where people spend 8 hours a day in close proximity, quietly, quickly, with the particular efficiency of information that people feel compelled to pass along because it is too large to hold alone. They were standing at the edges of the lobby, not gathered in a crowd, not pressing forward, just present. At the reception desk, near the elevator, banks by the corridor that led to the cafeteria. People who had worked for this company for years, in some cases decades. People I knew by name, and people I did not. People who had attended the Christmas parties and the quarterly all-hands meetings, and the company picnic at Griffith Park last August, where Olivia had organized the team competitions and won the relay race and laughed about it for 2 weeks afterward. They watched her cross the lobby. Nobody said anything. Nobody needed to. Olivia walked across that floor 30 feet, maybe 40, from the elevator to the glass front doors, and she did it without looking at the faces along the walls. She looked straight ahead. Her jaw was set. Her eyes were fixed on the doors and the street beyond them, and I understood that she had decided somewhere in the elevator that the only thing left available to her was to cross this distance with whatever dignity remained. I stood at the base of the stairs with Margaret beside me. Olivia passed within 10 feet of where I was standing. She did not look at me. I thought she was going to keep walking without looking, and I had already decided that was all right, that it was enough that I did not need a final moment, and then she stopped. Just for a second. Just long enough. She turned her head and looked at me, and her face did the thing that faces do when the thing behind them is too large and too complicated to organize into any single expression. It simply opened briefly before she could stop it. The composure cracked, and the daughter was there underneath the way she was always underneath no matter what else she had become or done or decided to be. "You ruined everything, Dad," she said. Her voice was not angry. It was not accusing. It was the voice of someone who had built an entire internal architecture around a particular version of events and was watching it come apart and did not yet have anything to put in its place. I looked at her. My throat was so tight that speaking felt like something I would need to work toward. I breathed through it. I found the words somewhere on the other side of the tightness, and I said them quietly just to her, just for the 10 feet of lobby floor between us. "I know you believe that," I said. "I'm sorry it came to this." Something moved across her face that I did not try to identify. Then Agent Doyle's hand came gently to Olivia's elbow, and they moved forward, and the glass doors opened, and the Los Angeles afternoon, ordinary and sun-drenched and entirely indifferent to what had just happened inside this building, received my daughter and the people walking beside her, and closed around them the way the world always closes around things, which is to say completely and without ceremony. The glass doors settled back into place. The lobby was still. The employees along the walls began quietly and without coordination to disperse back to their floors, their desks, their afternoon tasks. I watched them go. I watched the receptionist sit back down at her desk and pick up her headset and put it on, and I thought about what it meant that the world was already resuming around something this large, and I decided that it was not callousness. It was just the way of things, the way it had always been. Margaret stepped in front of me. She put both hands on either side of my face the way she had done in the kitchen 4 days ago, when everything was new and raw and I did not yet know the shape of what I was carrying. Her palms were warm. Her eyes were steady and direct and full of something that needed no translation. "Come on," she said softly. "Let's go home." I covered her hands with mine. I held them there for a moment, her warmth against my face, the lobby quiet around us. The Los Angeles sun coming through the floor-to-ceiling windows in the long, golden, unhurried way it did in the middle of a June afternoon. And I thought about 30 years, and about what you build and what you lose, and what remains when the building and the losing are finished. Then I nodded, and we walked out together through the same glass doors into the same afternoon that had taken my daughter, and I let it receive me too. 2 weeks after the arrest, Walker Medical Solutions was still standing. I say that not because I had doubted it would be. I had not seriously not, in the way that would have made me consider alternatives, but because there were mornings in those first 2 weeks when standing felt like an achievement worth noting. The company had lost 38% of its publicly traded share value in the 72 hours following the public disclosure of the federal investigation. Walker Medical Solutions had gone public 11 years ago, and the market had no patience for headlines like these. 3 distribution partners had requested emergency reviews of their contracts. One had suspended payments pending legal clarification. I had been through worse. Twice, in fact, once in 2001 and once in 2008, and both times the company had come out the other side, because the fundamentals were sound and the people were good, and because I had refused on both occasions to pretend the problem was smaller than it was. I was not going to pretend now either. The first thing I did was call a full staff meeting. Every employee, every floor streamed to the satellite offices. I stood in front of 214 people and told them exactly what had happened in plain language without softening the parts that reflected poorly on my family or on my own failure to see what was happening inside the company I had built. I told them that the fundamentals of Walker Medical Solutions were sound, that the fraudulent activity had been confined to a specific set of supply chain operations, that the FDA and our internal team were already working to remediate, that every employee who had done their job honestly had nothing to fear and everything to be proud of. I told them I was sorry it had come to this on my watch. The applause that followed was not the obligatory kind. It lasted longer than it needed to, which told me something about the people in those chairs that I filed away carefully and intended to remember. The second thing I did was call Carol Hines. She came to my office on a Tuesday morning 8 days after the arrest, with the slightly braced expression of someone who is not certain of their reception. I asked her to sit down. I told her that Walker Medical Solutions needed a director of quality assurance who had demonstrated under conditions of extraordinary personal pressure that she knew exactly what her ethical obligations were, even when meeting them was not possible. "I didn't meet them," Carol said, her voice tight. "I signed things I knew were wrong." "You kept a record of every single one," I said. "For 8 months under threat, you kept an accurate account of everything that was done to you and everything you were forced to do. That record is the reason the FDA can trace every fraudulent certification to its source. That record is the reason we can recall the right equipment and leave the legitimate supply chain intact." I looked at her directly. "That is not the action of someone who failed their obligations. That is the action of someone who was waiting for the moment when meeting those obligations became possible." Carol pressed her lips together. Her eyes went bright. "I'll need full independence," she said after a moment. "No management override on my certification decisions. No exceptions." "Agreed," I said. "Effective immediately." She nodded. She did not thank me. She simply straightened in her chair and looked at me with the expression of someone who had just been handed back something that had been taken from them and intended to hold on to it this time. The FDA recall process was methodical and thorough. 11 product lots across 4 equipment categories were flagged for immediate withdrawal from hospital and clinic inventories. 3 facilities received direct outreach from our remediation team within the first week. The process was public and documented and expensive, and it was the right thing to do, and I did not spend a single moment wishing it could be handled differently. Margaret was in my office when the courier arrived. She had been there most of the day, not working exactly, but present in the way she had been present throughout all of this, which was to say close enough that I was always aware of her, without needing to look for her. She was reading by the window when the thump of the mail slot reached us, and when my assistant knocked and brought in the afternoon delivery, the envelope was at the top of the pile. The return address was a federal detention facility on Alameda Street in downtown Los Angeles. I recognized the handwriting on the front, the particular way Olivia wrote her sevens with a small horizontal bar through the stem, a habit she had picked up from a math teacher in 7th grade and never lost. I had seen that handwriting on birthday cards and holiday notes and company memos for 34 years. I picked up the envelope, turned it over, ran my thumb along the sealed edge. Margaret set her book down. I opened the letter. It was one-page handwritten on lined paper, in the same careful, deliberate script she had always used when she wanted to be precise. Dad, I know you won't believe this. I'm not sure I would believe it either in your position, but I need to say it anyway. The plan was never to hurt you permanently. I know how that sounds. I know there is nothing I can say that makes the glass at Ethan's party acceptable or explainable in any way that matters. But the intention? My intention from the beginning was never to take everything from you. I just needed you to stop looking long enough for me to fix what I had broken. I thought I could fix it. I kept thinking I was close. I am sorry it went this far. I am sorry for what it cost you, and for what it cost Daniel, and for what it cost the people in that company who did nothing wrong. I don't expect forgiveness. I am not asking for it. I just needed you to know that the person who stood in that kitchen on Ethan's birthday was not someone who had stopped loving you. Olivia, I read it once. I read it again. I set it on the desk and looked at it for a long time without touching it. Margaret crossed the room and stood beside me. She read it over my shoulder, and when she finished, she did not say anything immediately, which was the right instinct. She waited. "What do you want to do with it?" she said finally. I thought about Harold Simmons in a care facility in Marin County. I thought about Carol Hines signing her name to things that made her sick for 8 months. I thought about Nathan Cross sitting in a New York office waiting for someone to come looking. I thought about Ethan at the birthday table holding a secret that did not belong to an 8-year-old. I thought about the footage, the vile, the unhurried efficiency of a woman performing a task she had rehearsed. And I thought about the handwriting on the envelope, the 7th grade math teacher, 34 years of birthday cards. "I don't know yet," I said. I opened the top drawer of my desk and placed the letter inside. I did not throw it away. I did not read it a third time. I simply put it somewhere I could find it again, if I ever decided I knew what to do with it, and then I closed the drawer. Some questions do not have answers that arrive on a schedule. I had learned that much at least from 62 years of living. Margaret put her hand on my back, warm, steady present, and I leaned into it just slightly, just enough, and looked out the window at Los Angeles, spreading out below us in the late afternoon light, going about its business. The way it always did, enormous and indifferent and entirely mercifully alive. The United States District Court for the Central District of California occupied a federal building on Spring Street in downtown Los Angeles that I had driven past hundreds of times without ever giving it much thought. I gave it a great deal of thought on the morning of December 9th. The building was everything federal buildings tend to be: solid, deliberate, designed to project permanence rather than welcome. I had dressed carefully that morning, the way I had dressed for the most important meetings of my business life, because I understood that what happened in the next several hours was the kind of thing that did not offer a second chance to make a first impression on the record. Dark suit. The tie Margaret had given me for our 32nd anniversary, which she had chosen. She said, because the color made me look like someone who knew what he was doing. She had pressed it for me that morning without being asked. The courtroom was on the 4th floor. I had been inside courtrooms before: depositions, contract disputes, the ordinary legal friction of 30 years in business. But I had never been inside one for anything like this. The room had the particular quality of spaces designed to make the stakes clear through architecture alone, high ceilings, wood paneling, the federal seal above the bench, the gallery seating already half filled when I walked in. Daniel was already there, sitting in the gallery with his hands clasped between his knees. He had lost weight in the 6 months since the board meeting. Not dramatically, not in a way that alarmed me medically, but enough that his suit sat differently on him than it used to. He looked up when I came in, and I went and sat beside him without planning to, because it seemed like the right thing, and because the geometry of the room, the gallery, the benches, the defendant's table where Olivia would sit, made the distance between us feel like something that should be reduced rather than maintained. "Dad," he said. "Daniel," I said. We did not say anything else. We sat together and waited, and that was sufficient. Olivia was brought in at 9 o'clock. She was wearing clothes I did not recognize, not her own, or not the kind she would have chosen, and her hair was pulled back more simply than she usually wore it, and she was thinner than she had been in June, and she moved with the particular careful economy of someone who had learned in 6 months to take up less space. She did not look at the gallery when she came in. She sat at the defendant's table and spoke briefly with her attorney and did not look up again. I looked at her for a long time, then I looked away. The proceedings were methodical and thorough, and in the way of federal criminal cases, considerably less dramatic than the events that had produced them. Lawyers made arguments, evidence was presented. The footage from the security camera in our Beverly Hills kitchen was played on a courtroom monitor, and I watched the jury watch it, and I watched their faces change, in the same sequence I had watched the board members' faces change 6 months earlier, and thought about how some images carry their own argument and require nothing additional. In the afternoon, I was called to deliver my victim impact statement. I took the oath. I sat in the witness chair and looked out at the courtroom, at the gallery at Daniel in the 3rd row, with his hands still clasped at Olivia at the defendant's table, who was now finally looking at me. The prosecuting attorney was a woman named Assistant United States Attorney Claire Merritt, 40 years old, precise and unhurried, the kind of lawyer who understood that the most effective examination was the one that got out of the way of the facts and let them do the work. She walked me through the evening of May 23rd, the birthday party, Margaret's hand on my wrist, the preliminary screen from Cedars-Sinai, the footage, Nathan's USB drive, Harold Simmons in a care facility in Marin County, Carol Hines and her spiral notebook, the board meeting on the 2nd Friday of June. I answered every question directly and without elaboration, the way I had been advised to, and I found that the facts stated plainly in sequence without anger or performance were more than sufficient on their own. Then AUSA Merritt paused, looked at her notes, and asked the question I had known was coming. "Mr. Walker?" She said, "In your assessment, did your daughter understand the full consequences of what she was doing?" The courtroom was very quiet. I looked at the question. I turned it over, the way I had turned it over for 6 months, in the office and in the car, and in the dark of the bedroom at 3 in the morning when sleep declined to come. I had not arrived at a clean answer. I was not sure a clean answer existed. I looked at Olivia. She was looking back at me. Her face was still not composed exactly, not the deliberate composure of the woman who had walked into the boardroom in her charcoal blazer, but genuinely still in the way of someone who has arrived after a long journey at the place where pretending is no longer available as an option. "I believe my daughter is the most intelligent person I have ever known," I said. My voice came out even, which surprised me slightly. I believe she understood the financial consequences, the legal consequences, and the personal consequences to everyone involved. I believe she had assessed and accepted those consequences as part of a calculation she had made. I paused. Whether she understood what it would cost her, what it would cost the parts of herself that had nothing to do with the calculation, I think that is a question she is still answering. The courtroom stayed quiet for a moment after I finished. Then AUSA Merritt said, "Thank you, Mr. Walker," and sat down. Olivia had entered a guilty plea 3 weeks prior after the federal lab confirmed the toxicology results and the full weight of Nathan's recordings had been presented to her defense team. Today was the sentencing hearing, the proceeding the federal system reserves for final statements for the judge to hear from every party before delivering the sentence that will stand on the record permanently. I had been sitting in the gallery since 9 that morning, and the room had the particular exhausted stillness of a process that has run its full course and arrived at last at the moment it was always moving toward. The judge looked down from the bench. The room went completely silent. Olivia Walker, 14 years in federal prison. Full forfeiture of assets connected to the fraudulent enterprise. Restitution to Walker Medical Solutions, and to the facilities that had received adulterated equipment. Daniel Walker, 3 years probation, full restitution of $2.3 million to be paid from personal assets over a structured schedule. Prohibition from serving in an executive capacity at any publicly traded company for 5 years. Nathan Cross. No charges filed in accordance with his cooperation agreement with the United States Department of Justice. I listened to each of these without moving. When it was over, when the gavel came down and the room began to shift and reassemble itself into the ordinary motion of people concluding their business and reaching for their coats, I sat still for an extra moment and let the room move around me. Daniel stood up beside me. He was looking at the defendant's table where Olivia was being spoken to by her attorney, her back to us, her shoulders carrying whatever they were carrying. "Dad," Daniel said. His voice was rough. "I know I don't have the right to ask anything of you right now. I know that. But I want you to know that I'm going to spend the rest of my life." "I know," I said. He stopped. "I know," I said again more quietly. "We'll figure out the rest of it. Not today, but we will." He pressed his hand over his eyes. His shoulders moved once. Then he steadied the way he had been steadying himself imperfectly and persistently for the past 6 months. Margaret was waiting on the courthouse steps. The December afternoon in Los Angeles was cool and bright and smelled of exhaust and eucalyptus, in the particular combination that it always meant to me coming home after a long trip. She was standing with her coat buttoned and her hands in her pockets and her face turned toward the sun, and when she heard my footsteps, she turned and looked at me with an expression that asked everything without asking anything. I walked down the steps and stopped in front of her. "It's done," I said. She reached up and straightened my tie, the anniversary tie, the one that made me look like someone who knew what he was doing. And then she put her arms around me right there on the courthouse steps in the December Los Angeles light, with the city going about its business in every direction. And I held on. I held on for a long time. And when I finally pulled back and looked at her face, I found that I could breathe again. Not because everything was resolved, not because the weight had lifted, but because the thing I had been carrying for 6 months had finally been set down in the place where things like this are meant to go, and I was still standing and she was still here, and that was for the moment more than enough. The office on the 30th floor had the best view in the building. I had given myself that view deliberately 30 years ago when I was designing the space and the architect had asked which floor I wanted, and I had said the top one without hesitation. Not because I needed the symbol of it, but because I had spent 11 months making cold calls from a rented desk in East Los Angeles, and I had decided that if the company survived long enough to need a 30th floor, I was going to be able to see the city from it. The company had survived. I could see the city. On the afternoon of December 12th, 3 days after the sentencing, I stood at that window and looked out at Los Angeles, the way I had looked out at it hundreds of times before, the grid of streets running toward the hills, the particular shimmer of the basin on a clear December day, the ocean visible on the western edge if the light was right, which it was. In the corner of the office, on a small shelf between the bookcase and the window, sat a glass display case. Inside it was a champagne flute. Not a special one. Not an expensive one. The kind that any caterer brings to any event in any home in Beverly Hills on a warm May evening. I had asked Margaret to retrieve it before the FBI took the rest of the evening's materials into evidence, and she had, and I had brought it here and put it in this case because I needed it where I could see it. Not as a reminder of what had happened. I did not need a reminder. What had happened was present in me in ways that did not require physical prompting. I needed it as a reminder of what almost did not happen. Margaret had been standing 3 feet from me when she saw something that no one else in that backyard saw. 30 years of medicine, a fraction of a second of professional instinct, and a willingness to act on what she knew, rather than on what would have been more comfortable to believe. That was the distance between the man standing at this window and the man in the care facility in Marin County who did not recognize his own family. 3 feet, half a second, one hand on a wrist. I heard Ethan before I saw him. He came down the hallway at the particular volume that 8-year-olds maintain, regardless of what the occasion calls for. Footsteps too quick and too loud for the carpet, a brief negotiation with whoever was trying to get him to slow down, and then the door to my office opened, and he was there still in his coat, from wherever Margaret had taken him that afternoon, his dark hair pushed up on one side from the wind. "Grandpa." He said it the way he said most things, as a statement rather than a greeting, as if my presence was simply a fact he was confirming. He came across the room and pressed himself against my side with the unself-conscious ease of a child who has not yet learned to calibrate physical affection against social context. I put my arm around him. He was still growing. I could feel it in the way he fit differently against my ribs than he had 6 months ago, taller by an inch that had appeared without announcement. He looked at the champagne flute in its case. "Is that from my birthday party?" he asked. "Yes," I said. He considered this with the solemn attention he gave to things that seemed to him to carry weight. Why do you keep it? I thought about how to answer that in a way that was true and also appropriate for someone who was 8 years old and had already been asked to understand more than 8-year-olds should be required to understand. Because it reminds me, I said, that the most important moments sometimes look like the most ordinary ones. You were about to blow out your candles. It was a regular birthday. And inside that regular birthday was something I needed to pay attention to. I paused. It reminds me to keep paying attention. Ethan looked at the glass for another moment. Then he looked up at me. Grandpa, he said, is Aunt Olivia a bad person? The question landed with the directness that only children achieve, no preamble, no softening, no awareness that it was the question I had been carrying inside me for 6 months, without arriving at a satisfying answer. I looked down at him. His face was open and waiting the way children's faces are when they have asked something real and are prepared to receive an actual answer rather than the managed version adults usually provide. She made very bad choices, I said carefully. Choices that hurt people who didn't deserve to be hurt. That's real, and it matters, and there are consequences for it that are real too. I felt him lean slightly more into my side, and I tightened my arm around him. But I think people are more complicated than bad or good. I think your Aunt Olivia is someone who got lost. And I think getting lost and being bad are different things even when the getting lost causes a lot of damage. Ethan thought about this with the same gravity he had applied to the question of the champagne flute. Okay, he said finally. Then, can we get ice cream? I laughed. It came out of me before I could moderate it. Not a polite laugh, not a social laugh, but the real thing, the kind that starts somewhere in the chest and arrives at the surface without asking permission. It felt like something cracking open that had been sealed for a long time. It felt in the most literal sense like relief. Yeah, I said, we can get ice cream. He pulled away from my side and went to find Margaret, his footsteps retreating down the hallway at the same unnecessary volume they had arrived with, and I turned back to the window. The December light was going golden over the city, that particular late afternoon color that Los Angeles did better than anywhere else I had ever been. Warm and long and unhurried, the kind of light that made everything it touched look like it was worth keeping. I thought about Daniel. He was somewhere in this city right now, working through the first months of a restitution schedule that would take years to complete, trying to rebuild something from the wreckage of choices he had made when he was too frightened and too ashamed to ask for help. He had called me the previous Sunday not to discuss the case or the company or the money, but to ask if I wanted to come to Ethan's baseball game the following weekend. I had said yes before he finished the sentence. I thought about Carol Hines 2 floors below me, doing the work she had always been meant to do, with the independence she had always deserved. I thought about Nathan Cross in New York, practicing law again, rebuilding a professional life that Olivia had held over his head like a blade for 18 months. I thought about Harold Simmons in Marin County, and about the version of this story that did not have Margaret standing 3 feet to my left, and I let myself sit with that thought long enough to feel its full weight, because I believed that gratitude required you to actually look at what you were grateful for, having been spared, rather than simply noting its absence. I thought about Olivia. I thought about her the way I had thought about her every day since June, not with the clarity that people seem to expect grief to eventually produce, but with the complicated, unresolved ache of a father who loved his daughter, and did not know how to hold that love alongside everything else that was also true. The letter was in the drawer of my desk. I had not answered it. I had not thrown it away. I did not know what I was going to do with it, and I had made a kind of peace with not knowing. Some things resolved, some things did not. 62 years had taught me to tell the difference, even if it had not taught me to prefer it. Margaret appeared in the doorway with her coat still on, and her keys in her hand, and Ethan visible behind her, already pulling his gloves off, because he had apparently decided that gloves were no longer relevant now that ice cream was imminent. She looked at me across the office at the window, at the champagne flute in its case, at whatever was on my face. Ready, she said. I looked at the city one more time. The light was going. The grid of streets was beginning to show its evening light small and steady, the 10 million ordinary lives of Los Angeles settling into the ordinary business of a December evening. I had built something here. I had lost something here. I had found out what I was made of here, and had not entirely liked the answer, and had kept going anyway. That seemed like enough. That seemed, in fact, like the whole of it. Ready? I said. I picked up my jacket from the back of the chair. I turned off the desk lamp. I walked to the door where my wife was waiting, and my grandson was already 3 steps down the hallway calling back to us to hurry up, and I stepped out of the office and pulled the door closed behind me. The champagne flute sat in its case in the dark. The city spread out below it, doing what cities do, and I went to get ice cream with my family. This family story changed me in ways I am still discovering. I built a company for 30 years on trust, and the deepest family betrayal I ever faced did not come from a stranger. It came from my own blood at my grandson's birthday table, wrapped in a smile I had known his entire life. That is the truth. Nobody tells you about family betrayal. It wears a familiar face. Don't be like me. Don't love so blindly that you forget to pay attention. Don't confuse loyalty with silence. The people worth keeping in your life will never ask you to stop seeing clearly. I believe God put Margaret beside me for a reason that night. That one moment, her instinct was grace I did not deserve, but will never stop being grateful for. Here is what this family story taught me. Surviving betrayal doesn't make you harder. It makes you wiser. It shows you exactly who belongs in your corner and exactly how tightly to hold them. If this family story moved you, leave a comment below. Tell me where you're watching from. Share it with someone who needs it. And subscribe to the channel so you never miss what's coming next. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. Some upcoming stories contain fictional elements built for reflection and education. If that's not right for you today, step away freely and find what serves you best.